Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you're here, and we appreciate you coming out to the Tennessee State Library and Archives. My name is Jamie Ritter. I have the pleasure of serving as the State Librarian Archivist. It's a wonderful role. Get to work with great people and attend these wonderful programs. It's just terrific. If you have not been here before, we really encourage you to take a look at our lobby exhibits. We have some interactive touchscreens. We have some panel exhibits. Right now, it's on the Centennial exhibition that was hosted here in Tennessee. And we'll be bringing in a new exhibit in the next month or so around letters to the governor, letters to and from governors, which is going to be fantastic. If you are new to the area or don't know, on June 1st, Tennessee celebrates Statehood Day, and we have a wonderful celebration here. We bring out the 3 original constitutions that Tennessee has, and we display those. We will have a big tent in the courtyard and all types of family fun activities. It's just a wonderful time, and that's going to be Saturday, June 1st this year. We offer free research and library cards. You can get them at the front desk. We are recording this session, so for any future viewers watching the video of Mr. Peck's talk, welcome, and we encourage you to come visit us in person. These programs would not be possible without the dedicated support and efforts of our public service team, which is headed up by the Director of Public Services, Gordon Belt. Gordon and his team spend a lot of time really looking for speakers to draw in to help bring Tennessee history to life. And we're just very thankful that he has found Mr. Peck, who is going to give a wonderful presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Gordon, who will introduce Mr. Peck, and we'll get on with our presentation. You'll have time to ask questions at the end. So thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Gordon?
Thank you, Jamie. Well, it's a real honor to introduce our guest speaker. And one of the goals that we have for these series of talks is to really connect people who are writing these wonderful books with the history that we have in this state and the records that we have here in this building. And a lot of times people will come to us and say, hey, I want to write a book, or I'm working on a publications. Can you help us? And so public services staff are really grateful for those opportunities to bring those collections out. And through the authors that write these books, it's a wonderful way to share that history. So I want to just thank Andy for joining us. Andy Peck is the series editor for the Cross Mountain Books Pecks of Mossy Creek series. And he's the 5th great-grandson of the founders of Mossy Creek and 3rd great-grandson of Dr. Isham Peck and his wife, Emma. Andy has a Master of Divinity degree from Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kansas City, Missouri, and a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the University of Missouri, Columbia. In 2022, he was the keynote speaker for both the East Tennessee Historical Society in Knoxville and the Appalachian Cultural Center at Carson Newman University in Jefferson City. In 2023, the East Tennessee Historical Society named Andy Peck the Community History Leadership Award winner. He's conducted book tours throughout East Tennessee, Western North Carolina, Georgia, and Louisiana, and we're honored to have Andy with us here today. So please give a warm welcome to Andy Peck.
Well, good afternoon. Nice to see everyone. Great to be here at the Tennessee State Library and Archives. And I want to thank Mr. Ritter for being here and Gordon for all the help he's provided getting us here to today. Then also I've been working with one of their archivists, Lindsay, who's helped get a lot of materials for me to assemble so that I could study this morning. And then when this is over, I'm going to go back and study some more and research. So this is a little bit of a selfish trip to do a little bit more research. Wanted to just mention, if you're like, oh, that was great, let's do it again. This is kicking off a book tour for Sawbones here for the books associated with my third great grandpa, Dr. Isham Talbot Peck. So we start here in Nashville on Monday. We'll be over in Jefferson City. Tuesday night we'll be in Hot Springs, North Carolina. Back to Jefferson City on Friday night. And at the old City Hall, old Jeff City Hall. And then on Saturday, we'll be at the Rose Glen Literary Festival. If you've never heard of the Rose Glen Literary Festival, it's actually quite fantastic. And there's something like 50 to 100 authors that will be there. There's presentations throughout the day. There's a keynote speaker. They have a fantastic lunch. So if you're looking for something to do next Saturday, then come on over to the Rose Glen and I'll be giving a similar presentation then. But yeah, there you go. There's Sawbones, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the Pecks of Mossy Creek, and then hopefully allowing some of this 1800s history to come to life for you. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your attendance today. So what are we going to cover? We're going to talk a little bit about family history here in Tennessee. We're going to talk about Adam Peck and Jacob Peck. I'm going to tell you about Isham, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of his biography. Then we're going to talk about the volcano, the Blue Ridge Mountains Appalachian volcano, and then we're going to talk about his writings that came out of that. We're going to share just a little bit about his wife Emma, his daughter Ada, his son Charlie, and then some of his other kids. And then I'm going to let you know about some of the future projects that are coming down the pike. So, since I'm here in Nashville, I wanted to kind of give you guys an idea, because when I'm over in Jefferson City, sometimes people heard of Adam Peck and they know that he and his wife Elizabeth were the founders of that town, but we're a little bit away from Jefferson City. And so I wanted to try to take it back to kind of the origins of how my family ended up in Tennessee. And then we'll get down to Isham, and then that way you know who we're talking about. But this is Adam Peck Sr. He's my fifth great grandpa. His dad had come over from Germany to Maryland, then down to Virginia. They lived in Fincastle, Bodetort, Virginia. And then there was this call out for the Over Mountain Men. You might have heard of them. And the British were making some big claims and saying, we're going to come over those mountains and we're going to do these bad things to your family members. And the Patriots said, not on my watch. And so they grabbed their rifles and they marched down to Kings Mountain, which is actually in South Carolina. And on 7 October 1780, they whooped the British. Okay. And Adam Peck fought in that battle, but another gentleman by the name of John Sevier fought in that battle. And now this is just conjecture, but those guys spent a lot of time together on the way down to this battle. There's great stories about that. Preachers that spoke to them along the way, places where they stopped, the Watauga community. And I believe that they became friends, or at least close kind of associates. After this, Adam Peck was given a land grant, and he was invited to come over and set up his 5,000-acre land grant, and he chose to do that in the state of Franklin. There was no Tennessee at the time. They had this, Southwest Territory, and then basically North Carolina, to pay off some of its Revolutionary War debt, had sold off part of this land, like to the national government, and they had the state of Franklin. Raise your hand if you've heard of the state of Franklin. Okay, most of you guys. So it existed from August 1784 to December of 1788, and basically that's where he settled, right in the last few months of the state of Franklin existing, and he founded what's called Mossy Creek, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But basically, there was a fresh-flowing, fast-flowing creek, and there was a lot of moss on it. And he said, let's call this place Mossy Creek. And they moved into kind of an old abandoned fort, protected them from the threats that were around at the time, which included Native Americans. And this is, if you look up here, you can kind of see some of the foundation. You see some concrete up there. This is some not live video, but video when I went there and visited. And, there's still other places where it's free flowing, but this is Cherokee Lake. There's Mossy Creek flowing, and then Adam Peck set up a grist mill. And so that was one of the things that brought economy right to that area, because when you had a land grant, you had to try to get people to come and settle, right? And so that was one of the first businesses there. Bringing it a little closer to here. I know Gordon's got some interest in Mr. John Sevier, Governor John Sevier. John Sevier was the governor, a leader for the state of Franklin, and then he was the first governor for Tennessee as well. And then they fought together in that Battle of Kings Mountain, which I didn't mention, but they said was the turning of the tide of the Revolutionary War, because it was this overwhelming victory for the Patriots. So really cool, and particular to the fact that we're here at the State Library and Archives, is that this letter is upstairs, and I got to hold it in my hands earlier today. I'd never had the opportunity to visit here before, but it's just so personally, I love holding history. Like, there's something, it's one thing to find the digital copy online or something like that, but to actually hold a letter, right, that was written in 1805 from the governor of Tennessee to my fifth great grandpa, there's something really special about that. And yeah, I know somebody else scanned it, but I took my own photos this morning, right? And so anyway, that's just kind of neat. But basically, Governor Sevier, they needed to cut a road from the Tellico Blockhouse down into Georgia. And he said, hey, Adam Peck, will you cut that road? He said, you got it, John. And so he cut the road. It became known as the Georgia Road, and it was completed by Adam Peck. I didn't find that out until recently. I was going back through some of my files, and I found the files and letters where once it was completed, Adam wrote back to Governor Sevier and said, I'm done. Check it out. And then I held in my hands this morning, because we came early to do a little bit of research. William Lillard then was sent to inspect the road, and I won't get into all of that because it's beyond the presentation this morning. But William wrote back to John Sevier and said, listen, he cut the road, but it's not exactly the way that we told him to cut the road. So I wish I could tell you. He said, oh, it's a perfect road. Adam nailed it. But he said, oh, it's too wide in points. It's too curvy over here. He cut that road through Cherokee territory in 1804, 1805. Additionally, I'll mention that Adam was one of the representatives to the first and second Tennessee legislature. So they're called the first and second General Assemblies. So as I was upstairs looking at a copy of that 1796 Constitution, I couldn't help but think, and I've actually, one of our projects this afternoon is to go through the microfilm of the minutes from that. I'm going to be scouring them to see, did Adam raise his hand and say, gentlemen, what about this? What about that? So I'm excited to do a little bit more research. So again, kind of marching through history here. This is Adam's son. He had quite a few children, actually, and a lot of them notable. But in my presentations and in my books, I'm a little bit selfish. I follow my line, okay? And so this is my fourth great grandpa, Judge Jacob Peck. He was state representative for Greene County, and I think one other county, maybe Jefferson County. He was a Tennessee Supreme Court justice, started in, I think, 1822. And he was also a geologist. And so I held this map in my hands. I think I showed it to Gordon. And then now this is really cool. And this is one of the benefits, okay, of not just for all the folks that are watching online, not just doing things on your computer, because it's really fun to do that. And it's amazing to me how much, family history and history research you can do on the computer these days. But to actually hold it in your hands all throughout this map, you can kind of see it over on the right side, but there's all this writing. And on a lot of the scans that I've seen of this, it's nearly impossible to read this small script. But to be able to hold the original up to my eyes, and I read, there's writing all along the border of this map. One of the things that I read this morning on this map that I'd never read before is right at the bottom down here. He's talking to the folks that are creating these maps, putting them in books and periodicals and magazines. And he says, my son, he doesn't say which one, we'll say it's Isham, but he says, my son would like to order 1,000 of these maps. And then he has all of these, he explains all of these little notations. He says, I've written in red ink all of the corrections I'd like you to make on this map. So anyway, that's another reason why come check out the history for yourself. So there we go. We've got Adam there on the left and his wife Elizabeth. Then Judge Jacob, his wife was Sophia Talbot, was from Kentucky. Even a state senator, Isham Talbot, was in her line. And then that brings us to Mr. Isham, Dr. Isham Peck, and then his wife Emma. So there you go. That's what they looked like. So how do we get here today? What kicked a lot of this off? As I was doing my own family research, and I use newspapers.com, little plug for newspapers.com. I like the way they organize things and how quickly you can find things. But I came across this article. It's actually a 1911 article. Now, he died in 1887. This is a 1911 article. And basically, there was a reporter, and you can read it for yourself, but there's this reporter, and he's on a train, and he's on the train going through the hills, crossing the French Broad River, looking up at all these different mountains, and he sees this big cross. Now, it's not there anymore. Isham planted it in 1886, and it was there, I think, until like the late 1900s, about 100 years that this cross stood on the top of Cross Mountain. The mountain eventually became known as Cross Mountain because of this cross. And so he asked the people around him, hey, what's the story? What's the story with the cross? And they said, oh, well, there was this Dr. Peck. He lost his daughter. And after he lost his daughter, he went up on the mountain and where she used to go read, he planted a cross. And that cross and that mountain actually sits at the border of it's the border of East Tennessee where it transitions to North Carolina and vice versa, obviously. So it was enough to where the guy said, well, that's an interesting story. I'll throw that in the newspaper. He got a few of the details wrong. He calls Isham Ed and Ed Isham. And so if you're trying to I don't exactly understand, I had to then also decipher that. So that's the clue for any newspaper people. Be accurate, okay? Because it's really hard 150 years later or 120 years later, 111 years later to get it right. But then there's this little note, and you can see it there at the bottom. He was a man of much literary attainment, and he contributed to the papers under the name of Sawbones. And then it says he died 8 years ago, but it was actually like 20 some years ago. So I thought, how interesting. What he wrote to the newspapers under the name Sawbones. What's that about? What if I could find his writings? Wouldn't that be cool? If you were doing family research and you were trying to look into your third great grandpa, and then all of a sudden you discovered that he was a writer and he wrote under this pen name, wouldn't you want to find out more? So I started searching and searching and searching, and I eventually found something like 41 articles that he had written, and that formed the basis for the books. So we're going to take a timeout, and we'll come back. But this is Bald Mountain. This is 1874, North Carolina. And these are some pictures from, let's see, Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper. And basically, man, there was rumbling and there was earth shaking and there was smoke coming from Bald Mountain, big explosions that were happening. And not only were they on Bald Mountain, but they could feel them and hear them over in Old Fort. Okay, so people started talking, people started getting afraid. The preachers started. I'm a preacher, by the way. I don't know if that was in my bio, but I'm an active duty Air Force chaplain and preacher. But anyway. The preacher started preaching and people started getting scared. And they said, you better repent. That mountain's going to blow. And if you're not right with God, then, and so people said, oh my goodness, who would have thought there's a volcano in North Carolina? And so that's what they did. And so some people started fleeing and some people started, saying, no, I'm just going to stay and pray. But this is this visual depiction of people, running down the road and one guy repenting on the ground and like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Is my heart right with God? And there's another picture, same edition of Frank Leslie's newspaper, but this young family, what are we going to do? This is where we live. Not like you could hop on a plane, or even necessarily hop on a train. What are you going to do if this volcano blows? Well, I'm gonna read just a little snippet from that. This is what got this all started. Okay, so Isham heard all this. He heard the commotion, and there's the Sawbones elucidates the mystery, startling volcanic facts, the cussedness of newspaper humanity. Well, what's that about? March 19th, 1874, hell afloat in the mountains, old Baldy's preparing to erupt, volcano, smoke, fire, the earth quaking, things toddling. Isham says, Sawbones, writing as Sawbones, I heard all this. I could not stand it. I had never seen a volcano. So I mounted my horse and I put out for Old Bald. It says the news got worse along the way. And then there's the end of the article. So basically what happened is that Isham got on his horse and he said, let's just get to the bottom of this. This sounds strange to me that we'd actually have a volcano over here. And he, just so you know, he lived in Wolf Creek, Tennessee. Okay, that's what the tie-in here to Tennessee. He started out, Isham was born in Mossy Creek, which is modern day Jefferson City, Tennessee. He's born on a farm there that the family called Oakland. And then eventually, I'll tell you some of the stories from his life, but then eventually he decided to retire in Wolf Creek. And Wolf Creek is right on the Tennessee side of that. There's Hot Springs, North Carolina, used to be called Warm Springs. Then there's Wolf Creek, and he retired in Wolf Creek. But he went across the state line to go check out this mountain, or the volcano. So he goes up to the mountain, and he gets all the way to the top, which I guess nobody had done at that point. And when he gets to the top, to just kind of paraphrase the story, he sees this guy riding a team of horses with a cart behind him full of big boulders, and he's riding it around in this circle on the top of the mountain, making a lot of noise, right? A big, anyway, you could just imagine. And then, so he walks out, he gets some stone, he calls it a doornick, but he gets some stones in his hand. He doesn't know exactly who it is. He walks out in the middle of the road as this guy's riding his team of horses, making all this racket. And the guy, stops short of him, and he says, is that Sawbones? Is that Sawbones? He said, get out of the way, Sawbones. Like I got work to do here. And Isham goes, George Sykes, is that you? So they both know each other. And he says, George, what in the world are you doing? And he said, listen, I'm a little bit hard pressed for cash. And he said, they're paying me quite well. And he says, okay, I get it. Okay, so you're making all this ruckus up here, but what about the explosions? And the guy tells him, oh, well, over there, we got this big pit and we bury dynamite and boom, every couple of days we let off these big explosions. Over here, we got the leaves and we wet them down and then we set a fire and then, man, the smoke just starts a-coming, And so he finds out that this is this huge, elaborate hoax that the newspapers were paying George Sykes, right, to create this thing about this volcano. And boy, did it work, because people, again, Frank Leslie's Illustrated newspaper are sending reporters. What's going on? This volcano really going to go off? And Isham basically just went and got down to the bottom of it. And George said, listen, whatever you do, he said, just don't tell anybody. And so Isham went back, and you read the end of the article when you guys grab the book later, and so he gets home, and he says the first words out of Emma's mouth are volcano. Like, what are you doing? You're in dangerous territory today. He said, like, settle down. Let me tell you the story. So the first thing he does is, to my knowledge, at least to the Morristown Gazette, which is in Hamlin County, John Helms, editor, he started writing articles under the pen name Sawbones. Now, I do believe he had written articles before, much before, to another newspaper under the pen name Sawbones, and I've only found one or two of those. But this book is mostly, I've got all the articles in here, but it's mostly formed from his articles that he wrote to the Morristown Gazette. So newspapers across the country are covering this event. They thought it was pretty interesting when this article pops up about like the true story about the volcano. And so newspapers around the country said, we'll publish that too. If that's really what's going on, we're going to let the world know. And so his articles, the Sawbones articles, started getting published around the country, carried in bigger newspapers around Tennessee, and then again, all across the country at the time. So I researched for years. I found every article that I could. 41 articles written between 1874 and 1886, and gosh, the amount of history that he covers in those is just incredible. And I thought, I'm gonna one day I'm gonna take every single one of these articles. I'm gonna analyze the heck out of them, and I'm gonna write a book about it. COVID hit. Air Force said, why don't you stay home for about 4 months? Of course, at the time it was like, stay home for 2 weeks, and then stay home for another 2 weeks, and then stay home for another month, and then maybe we'll get you back in July. And I was used to going across the base and doing visitation, all these different squadrons. I had all this energy. So every night when my family went to bed, from about 9 p.m. till 1 or 2 a.m., I would, transcribe all the articles. I would analyze all the articles, research everything in every article, and that's what forms the basis of the book. I'm not going to cover everything on here, but I just want to kind of give you an idea, introduce you to Isham. Born 1811 in Mossy Creek. When he's 11 years old, his dad becomes a Tennessee Supreme Court justice. His uncle becomes the judge for the District of Missouri, the first judge for the District of Missouri. I've been to the federal courthouse there in Missouri and taken photos of his photo along the wall with all of the judges there. He attends Greenville College, which eventually became known as Tusculum University, still exists today. Married his first wife, which was some sort of cousin, in 1832. Becomes an army surgeon in Mexico, 1834. Divorces her almost as soon as he gets back from the war in Mexico. He's a physician in the Black Hawk War, 1835. I'll share a little bit more about that in a second. 1836, he's 25 years old. His dad applies to be the surveyor for the Charleston and Cincinnati Railroad. I don't know for sure whether he got that job or not. 1837, marries his second wife, Helen Rapier Glass, in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Becomes a plantation owner at that time. 1838. I think significantly, his brother Adam Peck Jr., he turns down an opportunity to supervise one of the Cherokee immigrating parties in a letter to Chief John Ross. That was pretty neat. I put that together for my son. He could read that to his class because they were studying the Cherokee removal. Said, well, hey, this is this thing about, your second grade uncle or third grade uncle. 1844, he attends this Methodist conference and he opposes the resolution to split the church over the issue of slavery. Don't know what happens to his second wife. Can't find any records of whether she passes away or whether they divorce. I think that she probably passed away. 1848, he marries Emma over in East Carroll Parish, Louisiana. And I found this 1849, right? The 49ers. I find this Gold Rush letter that his brother Willie wrote, and I put that in the book. Really, really interesting as he's talking about heading out to California. He's going to strike gold and trying to get his brothers to come with him, including his brother who was a Civil War general. For the Louisiana Tigers, obviously later on. And then in 1853, his first daughter's born in Mossy Creek. He builds Glen Ada over in Wolf Creek in 1854. 1860, his brother Wiley kills a man named Charles Harris over in New Orleans. It's a really interesting story. That one's told in my book, Ada's Journal. It's in the back. He outfits Peck's Light Dragoons in 1861 when he's 50 years old, this Confederate unit based in Jefferson City. 1863, Grant's Army encamps at his in-laws down at the Henderson Plantation, close to Milliken's Bend, Louisiana. 1863, the Union Army uses his home and his dad, Judge Peck's home, as a headquarters for the Union Army during the Battle of Mossy Creek. And all of those original writings, like the Civil War records, are all in Sawbones 1. Let's see, 1865, his brother is promoted to general. As soon as the war ends, his first cousin becomes, William Lewis Sharkey becomes the provisional governor for the state of Mississippi. He writes the articles over that 12-year span there. 1876, his son Charlie starts a newspaper called The Independent, the Mossy Creek Independent. 1877, his son Ashby says, I got to get in this newspaper business. And so he starts a little newspaper called The Mountain Boomer. My Sawbones books have, to my knowledge, the only reproduced copies of that. I held the originals in my hands in Wolf Creek, took photos of them, and then put some of the copies in here. One of my future books will have all of the copies of The Mountain Boomer. But I don't know of any place that those exist other than the originals that are there in Wolf Creek. 1879, his son Charlie writes a novel called Charlie's Novel, and it is unbelievable. And my son Justice and my boys, I read this to them, and they said, "That's our favorite, Dad. We love Charlie's novel." Let's see. His daughter heads off to Salem Female Academy, passes away her first semester there. She gets sick. She's sick for 2 weeks. They bring her body home, bury her, and he plants the cross on the top of Cross Mountain. Excuse me. And then, unfortunately, 1887, his son commits suicide. And as soon as he gets the news, he dies on the spot. And they conduct a double funeral for him and his son Ashby in the old Westview Cemetery there in Jefferson City. I said I wasn't going to cover it all, but then I did. So here we go. So all I'm able to do, because this book is vast, I had to split it into two volumes. Each book is almost 300 pages long. So you've got Sawbones 1, Sawbones 2, each book almost 300 pages. Each book has about over 250 illustrations. Each book has 200 to 300 citations from where I document everything, where all of the facts come from. There are so many stories you can imagine. If 41 articles, and if every article mentions, let's say, just 10 things that happened during that time, people, places, things, laws, everything, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things. So today I'm just going to give you this little snapshot of what he covers in his book. So the first, and let's see, I'm going to use this one. There we go. Boop, boop. There we go. So upper left here, this is a picture of one of these early, right, kind of a camp meeting, right, a tent revival, early Methodist circuit riding preachers that would go out and preach. And he attended some of these things. And there's I believe it's a John Johnson, one of these traveling preachers. He talks about his respect for this man, for this preacher. So I've got a whole section in the book about early Methodist circuit riding preachers. Really interesting history, what those folks had to go through. And then some of the stories that happened from those revivals. Over here, bottom left, you got a picture of the Peck's Light Dragoons, right? This is the unit that his $1,000, which probably stretched a little while, in like 1861, 1863. So that's the unit that he helped outfit there in Jefferson City. Let's see, who's this? Andrew Jackson, President Andrew Jackson. This is from the Battle of New Orleans, which was when he was a little boy. His relatives fought, his uncles fought in that battle. Some great stories that came from that. But in one of his articles, he says, speaking of Old Hickory, I knew him. And so that was very interesting to me. Okay, how? I have to piece this together. How did my third great grandpa know President Andrew Jackson? So there's a whole section of the book about Old Hickory. And then here in the bottom right is this picture of a cotton plantation right in the South. His second wife was this plantation. Yeah, her husband had been, her first husband, Anthony Glass, had been a plantation owner. He passed away. She became this very, very wealthy widow in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And I'm sure much to the chagrin of the others around, he married Miss Helen Glass and inherited all of her land and all of her slaves. And that is one of those things that, brings us to that point. When you're doing family history, someone told me early on, they said, Andy, I'd be careful. You never know what you're going to find out about your family history. And I said, listen, I can't change the past. All I can do is learn about it, and deal with it. No, I'm not proud that my family, that my family member owned slaves, but I can't change the past. It happened. So all I can do is learn about it, study it, and hope and help inform, my kids about the evil of the institution of slavery. I will mention, though, a quick story. After the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, he wrote this story, one of the articles that he wrote, he talks about this time period right when the Emancipation Proclamation had signed. He was sitting on, I believe, his third wife, Emma, her family's plantation, the Henderson plantation. His brother, William Rain Peck, who was one of the Civil War generals, he also had a plantation called the Mountain Plantation there on the Milliken's Bend area. But he said that as soon as it was signed and all of these slaves were freed, there was this time period where everybody was trying to figure out, what now? I mean, the plantation owners were saying, okay, what are we going to do now? Like, what are we going to do with all of our workers? And then all of the slaves were saying, what are we going to do for a job? And so he talks about how a lot of these young men, especially, were becoming preachers. They were like, I'll become a preacher. And so he talks about this group of former slaves comes up to him. They're kind of passing by, and he says, hey, what are you guys up to? They said, oh, we're going to go kill this guy. He's up, up on the next plantation over, and we're going to go kill him. And he said, and why is that? And they said, oh, well, we heard he believes this heresy, this false theology about God. And so we're going to go kill him. And he said, you can't do that. Just because the guy doesn't believe like you do, just because he believes, some false theology, you can't kill him. And so anyway, he talks them out of going to commit murder because of a theological difference. So I'm proud of that fact. But anyway, that whole story is in the book. I mentioned he went to Tusculum Academy or Tusculum University, which at the time was called Greenville College. Over to the right there is a picture of Abraham Lincoln. He was in the Black Hawk War. So as I do this research, I find out that he was in the Black Hawk War. I say, oh, well, who else was there, on this border of Iowa and Illinois and at Rock Island, Illinois? Who was there? Oh, Zachary Taylor, who eventually became president of the United States, was there. Abraham Lincoln was a young lieutenant, there. Jefferson Davis, right, future president of the Confederate States of America, was there. And there was Isham. He was their physician. He was their surgeon, right? And he talks about how cholera, there was a massive cholera outbreak, and he was watching all of these soldiers die, and he was trying to take care of them. So just brushes with, with history, brushes with presidents, brushes. So you never know when you're going to, you start digging into family history. Okay, how does my family, interact with history? Well, that was one of the ways. I don't know. He doesn't talk about talking to Abe or, or Zach or Jeff, but they were there together. Another thing that's very interesting, I think, he talks this a whole history about duels, and so there's a whole section of the book about duels and the code duello, right? This was established. You could pick up a book on the duel code, right? So if you wanted to have a duel with somebody and you wanted to make sure that you followed the code, then you could read this little book called the Code Duello, right? The duel code. And he says he was there for like 11 different duels. Down in Vicksburg, the editors would, one editor would print something in the Vicksburg Sentinel, and then another editor would say, that's not true. And, he would print something, and then this editor would challenge this editor to a duel, and then they would duel. And then they would have to find at least one new editor, and so there's this whole time of history where there's this, he calls it like the dueling editors of Vicksburg or something like that in the book. And he talks about specific instances where he was there, times when his brother William would like load the gun for one of the folks that was in the duel. So I have a whole chart in the book that shows every single duel. I researched every single duel, and you can learn who was there, what was their position, who died, who got wounded, all this different stuff. Really, really interesting. And then I've got you can click throughout the book. There's QR codes, so you can scan the QR code or click on the link if you get a digital version of the book, or type in the website, and then you can actually read that original, like 1850s duel book. He was really not pleased about the Tilton Beecher affair. Henry Ward Beecher was this military chaplain, preacher, pastor, and the Tilton Beecher affair. Who's heard of that affair? Tilton Beecher. Nobody. All right. So if you're interested in a new thing of history you've never learned about, a lot of his articles, he's just hammering on Beecher. He's like, stop it, Beecher. And basically it's this whole kind of scandalous affair that, man, it's like one of the biggest newspaper pieces in 1900s history in America. So if you're like, really? And I've never heard about it. It was interesting to research, but that's Henry Ward Beecher, and I believe Miss Tilton. In the middle there, it's a picture of the pinback dresses, and so he mentions the ladies wearing their pinback dresses, and he's talking about another guy who wrote named Bascom, and Bascom was writing about these girls who were wearing these pinback dresses, and he says, "Oh, Reverend Johnson, he could have preached a pinback off of a girl in 5 minutes or something like that, like she would feel so bad for wearing this, this dress that she'd go home and change." He talks about a story when the preacher, he was preaching about, wearing simple dress and things like that. And so a girl left and she took the pretty bow out of her hair because she felt so convicted of trying to draw attention to herself. So I've got some pictures of like 1900s fashion in the books as well. This is the old, let's see, Eat Taters and Wear No Clothes Railroad. Who's heard of that railroad? There you go. East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railroad, but based on the abbreviation, they would call it the Eat Taters and Wear No Clothes Railroad. So anyway, he was a part of the party that rode the very first train ride when they cut the railroad from Wolf Creek over to Hot Springs, North Carolina. And it's a really neat story about what the ride's like, and it was so smooth. They started singing hymns. So I've got the hymns in the book. And then he talks about the luncheon that was hosted by the Rumbaugh family, which ran the Hot Springs Hotel, and Miss Bessie Johnson, who had married President Andrew Johnson's son, and her home, and the wonderful reception that they had. Then there's this sad picture of Laudanum. We know that he lost at least 2 sons to overdosing on laudanum. We think, from everything I've read, by suicide. A 3rd son, Charlie, who wrote Charlie's novel, don't know whether he took laudanum or not. There's one newspaper that said he died by suicide, but doesn't necessarily say laudanum. Won't get into the whole story, but tragedy is something that Isham dealt with, losing 3 sons to suicide, losing 2 daughters before the age of 16, had 9 kids, so 5 kids that he buried. And as I mentioned earlier, when he found out that Ashby had taken his life, that was his heart was so brittle at that point from all of the tragedy that he had suffered, he couldn't take it, and he died. He writes a lot about politics in his books. This is the 1880, president and vice president ticket there. General James Garfield, General Chester Arthur, and eventually they won. Of course, Garfield was assassinated not too long, or was he assassinated or did he just die? Anyway, he passed away not too long after he became president. So there's a lot of things about politics, Tennessee state laws, things like that, but then also things at the national level that Isham writes about. This is a picture of early Mossy Creek, and that's where he was from. And he was born there. He had family there. He would go back there. And he actually wrote 2 articles that are quite lengthy, and he covers all these different aspects of Mossy Creek. And as I've over the last 7 years, I've become friends with historians from Mossy Creek. And as I would share with them, hey, his article says this, where's that? They say, we've never heard of that. Well, he talks about this part of town. Where's that part of town? Didn't know there was a part of town named that. So one of the things I did was, using his articles and everything else that I could find in local contemporary newspapers, I was able to sketch out these different suburbs around Mossy Creek and with their names and things. So you can learn about Carsonville and Haiti, and there's all these little suburbs that basically have been lost to history. But because I found these articles, trying to bring it back, share the history with the folks. This is a picture of D.L. Moody and Ira Sankey, this duo, right? Preaching duo and singing duo that would travel. So here's a little history. After stopping in Cleveland and Chicago, Moody's itinerary would take him to Knoxville, Chattanooga, and Nashville, and Memphis, then on to New Orleans, then Houston and Galveston, then back through Mobile, Oxford, and Selma to Atlanta, Savannah, Jacksonville, on and on and on. But basically, he talks about these these big shows and all these people that are going to see these big preachers. If I remember correctly, he wasn't overly excited about kind of this big, kind of like revivalism that's taking place. He kind of thought it was a big show. But it's one of the final articles in the book. So just to kind of give you an overview, Sawbones Volume 1 is going to give you his full biography. I'm going to share about Rock Island and the Black Hawk War, those duels, the Beecher-Tilton scandal. There's that other newspaper that he wrote to called Bill Porter's Spirit of the Times, the Methodist circuit riding preachers, Emancipation Proclamation, his friendship with Harry Heiss, who was the editor for Nashville's Daily American newspaper, and on and on. He was attacked by a deer in 1854, and forever after that, he suffered from neuralgia in his face. Sawbones Volume 2 covers the Greenback Party, which doesn't get talked about a lot. I mentioned the railroad, a lot of history about Wolf Creek and Mossy Creek, and then also Hot Springs. And then again, presidents, talks about Charles Darwin. There's a gentleman named Bob Ingersoll, the great agnostic. Anybody ever heard of him? Again, kind of lost to history. What I found as I researched this book was there were these things that there's a lot you can find online about them, but they're just not in the history books. It's just not notable enough to where you would learn about it in high school. And so therefore you maybe never learn about it. And so each book has a lot of history. And then also for the family history buffs, in the back of Sawbones 2, I've got the genealogical reports for about 750 descendants from Isham. it was a big project, but I basically traced every one of his kids, all of their kids, all the way to present day, and then got permission from them, and then put those in the book. So we've got my cousin Wayne and Miss Hanan here. Thank you guys for coming. My great aunt Net, his mama, is 92, about to turn 93. We're going to throw a birthday party for her here in Nashville in April, and she is the person who kind of helped me get started with family history and getting into this. And I just probably 3-4 months before this photo was taken, I said, Net, I said, do you know the name of your grandparents? Because my dad didn't know his family history, back that far. And she said, oh, well, yeah. And she started telling me about Wolf Creek and her grandpa, Dr. Edward Jerome Peck. And so then I traveled to Wolf Creek. Right? The natural thing to do is then travel to Wolf Creek. So I went to Wolf Creek and I met Miss Betty Walker, who's still with us, and just amazing, amazing woman, and loves history, and her son Al. And then she said, well, if you're coming, I'll invite one of your cousins over. And so Ann Peck, who's also in her 90s, she came over, and I got to meet her, and they took me all over and showed me the history. This is the Dr. Ed Peck Monument. This is Isham's son there in Hot Springs. And if and over here, this little inscription says, in memory of our beloved doctor. And then you can't read it, but it says, he loved the folks. So my next book is going to be called He Loved the Folks, Dr. Edward Jerome Peck of Hot Springs, North Carolina. This is Glen Ada. This is where Isham built his home in 1854, named it after his first daughter, Ada. This is not the home that was built in 1854. It burned down. This is an Aladdin kit home that was put there in the 1920s, but still exists there. And we were able to go there, have dinner with the owners. And then they actually were the first ones to share with me the writings of Emma, Isham's wife, which was Ada's journal. And then that was the first book that I published. I traveled over to the East Tennessee Historical Society, East Tennessee History Center. And at the time, they just happened to have that map that I showed you earlier. They had this beautiful oil painting of Judge Jacob Peck, and talked about the, East Tennessee's marble industry and geology. And I don't know, I just thought that I kind of looked like the guy. So again, if you can actually find a picture of your long lost relatives, you might find out, oh, we kind of look alike. And then we went over to Mossy Creek, and a woman by the name of Linda Gass, who used to work for Carson Newman University. She took me, our family, all around town, showed us the sights, and it was a really amazing tour, and formed the basis for a lot of my books. And then the town newspaper did a little write-up. So this is a little picture of Isham's family, and you got Ada and Charlie, and then Ed, who was my second great grandpa, and then Lewis, Paul, Helen, Robert. Don't have pictures of William and Ashby. This is Ada's journal. I think I have a short little, it's like a 10-second or 30-second little video clip about Ada's journal. Sorry, it's not louder. So yeah, I'll just mention for everybody not here today who may be watching this in the future online, you can get all of my books at crossmountainbooks.com, or you can also get them on Amazon. This is a picture of the actual Ada's journal. The first one I got was a photocopy, but then at the book signing for Ada's journal, one of my relatives brought the original Ada's journal, which I didn't know where it was or where it existed. It exists in her home. And so she brought it. I'm very thankful to her for bringing it. And there are actually little notes that were in there that I'd never seen before that painted even more history. Just really amazing, but a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful book, and well written by my third great grandma, Emma. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read to you from Ada's journal, but let me just share with you that it is a really fun, exciting book that Emma wrote from the perspective of her little daughter, Ada. So as soon as Ada was born in 1853, she started this journal and she wrote it from her perspective. So it starts out, says at Oakland, Tennessee on the 25th of July, 1853, about 2:00 in the morning, I was born. And it goes on and talks about if you could look at Tennessee in 1853 as you traveled on stagecoach and steamboat and railroad, what would life be like if you were a little baby girl? What when you looked at your mama and she was wearing a bonnet for the first time? So, I'd never seen my mama with a bonnet. Or, what's Uncle Bill doing, who eventually became the Civil War general? So it's this really, really creative book. It's not too long, but it tells the story of little Ada from birth till age 2, when Emma then had her second kid and she said, I don't have time for that anymore. And so anyway, beautiful, beautiful book. There's illustrations all throughout it from the Library of Congress, and then family history as well. The second half of the book is Emma's letters. One of the things that folks had shared with me were photocopies of Emma's letters. I also found more in the archives of the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I photographed them all. COVID hit. I stayed up late and I transcribed letter after letter after letter. And then I was able to start searching them and putting them in date order and all of this, adding photographs and stuff like that. So the second half of Ada's journal and Emma's letters is all of these letters, and it talks. It is the perspective of a woman living through the Civil War. She starts writing before the Civil War. She writes all the way through the Civil War and then after the Civil War. So 1850 till almost 1900, she writes letters to her best friend Emma Peck, to Emma Allen, and then Emma Allen back to Emma Peck. So it's this exchange of letters. And also once one of them passed away, and even before, her mom, Louise Henderson, great writer, and she would write to Emma Allen as well. And so beautiful, beautiful letters. And I add illustrations throughout to talk about, they named their son Ashby. Well, why did they name him Ashby? She says because of the Civil War General Turner Ashby, and he had fallen in battle. And so she said, we're going to name our little boy Ashby. Again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to read, but just really, really amazing letters and history there. I threw a Peck family reunion in Mossy Creek a few years ago. So I've got pictures of that in the book. We had 25 Peck family members that could trace their lineage to Mossy Creek, Jefferson City, Tennessee. We had 25 folks come from 5 states with about a month's notice on Facebook, just saying, hey, come on, we're going to do a book signing, and it was really neat to meet them, and started our own little Pecks of Mossy Creek, genealogical society kind of thing. And then here's Charlie's novel. One of my family members brought the original Charlie's novel, which I didn't know existed at the time. And Charlie was a lawyer, and he had this big form book, and he had printed his novel, written it as a serial novel, a chapter a week or so. And then he pasted it in this journal. It got closed up. He passed away at the age of about 25 or so. And then it sat in various attics for 140 years. And I said, ma'am, do you know what this is in this big box of history? She said, no. And I said, this is a novel written by Ada's brother, Charlie. And she said, oh, that is awesome. And so I transcribed the whole thing, added about 200 images, and included all of the notes and writings and poems and things like that Charlie had included as well. So that he had a little crush on Miss Sarah Bernhardt, who was a French stage actress. So he had the lithograph in his book, but then I found the original painting that the lithograph had been made from, and included that. And then he has that little poem. There's a short little poem he wrote. The folds of her wine dark violet dress glow over the sofa, fall on fall, as she sits in the air of her loveliness with a smile for each and all. And so he's got this original poetry and this novel that he wrote. And it is just, it's amazing. So I hope that you'll take some time. If you've got young men in your life, or you just like history, Charlie's novel, his title, Mary Anderson and Peacock the Mineralogist, The Bad Luck of a Young Southern Girl. I called it Charlie's novel. And that's a picture of Charlie there. As I was doing research, I came across this book called Oblique City. Miss Betty Walker kept mentioning Oblique City, and I couldn't even tell what she was saying. What are you saying? Oblique City, Oblique City. Oh, oblique. City. And finally, I took the time to look at all the photographs I'd taken of this book, and I realized how much history was in there. So I created a book series called Historical Reprint, where we take books that are hard to find out of print. Maybe you can only find them if you go to a rare books room in an archival type museum, and I republished Oblique City, and then get to go on fun adventures with my son Justice. And we went there, and some said, "Oh, you're going to be in Wolf Creek. You should go, hike up to Wolf Creek Falls." I said, "Great." So we did it. We took pictures and everything. We got back, and months later, I'm going through my photographs, and I was looking at the Oblique City book, and I said, "Oh gosh, that Minnehaha Cascade in the book, that looks just like the Wolf Creek Falls that we visited." And lo and behold, it is, and it was. But again, history-wise, no one that I've found knows that Wolf Creek Falls, 100 and let's see, how long ago is this? I don't know, over 100 years ago, that Wolf Creek Falls used to be called the Minnehaha Cascade. So trying to bring it to a close here. What's my goal? To create engaging books that inform, educate, and inspire. I love to connect people with stories, firsthand accounts that help open a window to our history, and I'm devoted to preserving those stories and writings in their original form so readers can engage, study, and learn from historical texts. Not only are the transcriptions in all of my books, but then I try to put wherever I can fit it. One of the reasons I made these 8.5 by 11 is so that you can actually see those original articles. You can see some of the paintings and things like that. And personally, I find that when I'm able to take a look at pictures like this of Isham, that it's all, and I study his writings and I learn what other people said about him. I feel like it's almost like he's looking back at me. It's like it comes alive. It comes alive as I get to know him and his writings. So I just think that's neat. I feel like I know him, even though he lived 1811 to 1887, 200 years ago. I feel like I know Isham, and I hope that you guys will take the time to get to know Isham as well. I have QR codes throughout all of my books. And so as you're reading, you might say, "Oh, the French Broad River, I've never been there." Well, I'll have a QR code. You can scan it, and then I take you to the French Broad River along the banks of the French Broad River, and you can hear and see it rush by. I take you to Glen Ada, where you can walk around the property where he created his home and named it after his little daughter. I have an index in all of my books, so you can look up your own family. If you have any family history in Tennessee or Hot Springs, North Carolina, you can look up your own family names and see maybe they had some interaction with this history. And then again, the primary source material is in there as well. Here's the projects that I'm working on. I've got He Loved the Folks, Dr. Edward Jerome Peck of Hot Springs, North Carolina. I really just need the time to edit that so I can put that out there. It's mostly done. Emma's songbook is, again, his wife, Emma. She was a pianist, and I was gifted an incredible gift. But she's born in the 1830s. I was given her early childhood, and then as she grew up, her collection of piano music, and she's written on it, signed it, written poetry, songs. It's about 50 to 100 songs, from Jenny Lind and Jenny Lind and others. And then I've also got Judge Jacob's geology journal. So his dad wrote this geology journal, and it's fantastic. It's already been transcribed. I just need the time to get it published for you. But a lot more to come. I hope to publish a book about Judge Jacob and then also his dad, Adam. So we'll stop there and open it up for questions. So what questions do you guys have?
From East Tennessee, Pack, not Peck.
Okay.
There's a Pack Mountain over there somewhere. I've never been there. And, I know quite a bit about them because they ended up going, one of the sons of Jeremiah, who was the first one over there.
Yes.
The one the mountain's named after. One of the sons ended up going first to Texas, and I've got them in a Texas census, and then I could see the family going up to Arkansas. And from there on, it's not a problem because we're all in the same cemetery.
Right.
But
so your initial question was I just lucky? I would say, I would use the word blessed, but yeah, I was very blessed. And I will also say that it took a lot of dogged determination, phone calling, in-person visits, and things like that. I called around. I would find one person that knew one clue. And I would say, who else might know, some of this history? They say, oh, you need to talk to Jackie Painter. Do you have her number? No. Okay, perfect. So I find Jackie's number. I call Jackie. I say, Jackie, here's who I am. Here's my family history. What do you know? And she'd say, well, I know this little sliver. I can send you this one photo. I said, who else knows? Well, the people at that church know. You got it. I call that church, and there was just this historian, this author, this person. And then I just took the time. I said, I got in my car with my whole family, much to their chagrin. And we traveled over there, and I went from person to person. I did video interviews. I said, what can you tell me? What books do you have? And I would scour their bookshelves, and each person, each little thing, each little clue would tap me into one more piece of history. And I'm a digital hoarder. I take all those photos and everything. And then over the next few years, I would go back through and I would okay, oh, wait a second. What is this? Oh, that's the signature of my second great grandpa. He attended that wedding, and I would just start piecing it together, laying it all out. But that's a great question. Any other questions you guys have? Yes, ma'am.
So do you have any idea? I'm sorry, I came in late. I might have missed this. So do you have any idea, like, here he is in Upper East Tennessee, and then he's marrying this lady in Vicksburg, Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
Like, did he have family in Vicksburg or?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, in Ada's journal, which she was born in Oakland, okay, which is Eastern Tennessee, but throughout just even her first 2 years of life, they would travel first by stagecoach, then by railroad over to Memphis, get on a steamboat. They travel all the way down to her, her mom's plantation, East Carroll Parish, the Henderson Plantation, and back and forth. William Lewis Sharkey was his Isham's first cousin, and the Sharkey family had moved down and was living in that Vicksburg area, the Luciokina, I think, plantation down there. For whatever reason, I don't know all of the reasons, but the family, I don't know exactly when, but at some point they decided, Isham and his brother, they decided to go live with William Lewis Sharkey, or at least maybe he was invited down there, and they started living in that Vicksburg area and doing business down there and things like that. So that's the only family connection I know of is the land and the Sharkey family that lived down there, that they were relatives with.
Okay.
So, and there's a whole section about Vicksburg, and we got to travel to Vicksburg this summer and learn a lot more about their Vicksburg connections. Sir, you got a question? So he was born in 1811. I think basically the 1840s, especially, like maybe late 1830s, but 1840 until I think 1848, I believe, is when he married Emma. And then that was over on the Louisiana side and just a little bit north. So basically the 1840s was when he was in Vicksburg. Anybody else? There are a lot of ties to the War of 1812, and there's actually a photo in the biography of Isham in the book. There's a picture taken on the streets of New Orleans. It's actually a silhouette. Three of my relatives are walking along the street, maybe in the midst of the War of 1812, but maybe when the fighting wasn't happening, and they're wearing their top hats and everything, and a man says, I've got to cut your silhouette. And they said, okay. And so he cuts this silhouette of these three Peck members walking along the streets of New Orleans. And that picture is in the book. But yeah, a lot of them fought. Some of them died. Adam Peck Jr., I believe. He didn't die. But anyway, they fought in the War of 1812, the Battle of New Orleans. Copy. I don't know for sure about the Creek Wars. Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Right.
At the top, it was stenciled. Something was stenciled into it.
Okay.
Do you know what that said, or do you?
I believe that says and it says that like a Mossy Creek farm, an early Mossy Creek farm. Did you say where did I get it? I found it online, and there's a chance that one is held here at this museum, or sorry, at the archives. But I forget right at the top of my head. But in the book, you grab the book and the note exactly what it's called, where it's from, the year. It's all in the book. Any other questions? Guys, let me just walk you through what we have over here. Okay. First of all, my 13-year-old son, Justice, give him a round of applause for helping me out for our book tour. So we've got, the first thing is our history table. This is things you can pick up. They're not for sale, but you can hold them. You can hold history, okay? We got replica scrimshaw, which is a whale tooth with a beautiful, intricate drawings on them. Paregoric bottles, picture about the laudanum. The parrot is little Ada was given a parrot by her Uncle Bill on her birthday, and they love to talk to the parrot. There's copper, real copper. There's real silver. There's a 12-pounder cannonball from Vicksburg. There's also grape shot from that was used during the Civil War, and numerous other items from history, cotton dolls and things like that. On to the book table, we got Christie. Who's read Christie? Okay, if you haven't read Christie, it is amazing. It's incredible novel. If you do come from a Christian background, it is an incredible literary story of the gospel. It is really, really amazing. There's a doctor in the book called Dr. McNeil. I think potentially Dr. McNeil is based on Dr. Edward Jerome Peck, who was my second great grandpa, at least aspects about his life. So that's why I have Christie. I've also traveled there. So there's QR codes in there, and I'll take you on a journey to the original place where Christie's based on, which is up in the hills of Del Rio, Tennessee. The next book there is Oblique City, Charlie's novel, Ada's journal, and then Sawbones 1 and 2. I do paperbacks of all of my books, but then I do hardcovers, and all of the hardcovers have color photos. So every book is chock full of photographs. Again, in the Sawbones books, I think something like 500. But if you like color photographs, then grab the hardcovers. And with that, we'll turn it back over to our state librarian.
Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you very much, Andy. Again, thanks for coming. We're glad you're here. If you would like to explore the library and the reading room, research room, please feel free to do so. And we hope you take advantage of some of the wonderful books that Andy has here. And with that, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.